Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. So the teams are out. Wales travelling up to Murrayfield to play Scotland this weekend in the second round of the Six Nations. Very interesting team news from a Welsh perspective. From a Scotland perspective, less interesting in terms of news lines, but still a lot to get into just about the consistency of this current Scotland team. That's reflected in the team that Gregor Townsend has named. If you are new to the channel, do hit that subscribe button, like the video as well, that's always appreciated, just gives it a little boost, and drop a comment down below. What do you make of the two teams that have been selected, whether you're Welsh, Scottish, or any other nation for that matter? How do you see this game going this weekend up at Murrayfield? All right, let's get into it. So even though Scotland are at home, I'm actually going to start with Wales because I think their team selection is probably a little bit more interesting. So I will come on to Scotland, but that'll be just a little bit later in the video because in terms of the Welsh, there's 5 changes in total. All of those are in the pack, unchanged in the back line. Dafydd Jenkins is set to make his first international start in the second row. He comes in for Alan Wyn-Jones. Justin Tipuric, Taulupe Faletau, Gareth Thomas and Thomas Francis are all also drop out as well. So you've got Wyn-Jones at loose head prop coming in, Dylan Lewis at tight head, Chris Tschunza and Tommy Reffell coming into the back row. And as I said, Dafydd Jenkins makes his first start in the second row. So the kind of big headline from a Welsh perspective is the experience that is being left out of this Welsh team by Warren Gatland. In terms of the 15, starting in that front row, Wyn-Jones and Dylan Lewis, who I mentioned, are either side of Ken Owens. You then got Dafydd Jenkins and Adam Beard in the second row with Tschunza and Reffell on the flanks, and Jack Morgan moves to number 8. And then that unchanged back line, I beg your pardon, that I mentioned, Thomas Williams, Dan Biggar, Joe Hawkins, George North, Rio Dyer, Josh Adams and Liam Williams. And then the bench, Scott Baldwin, Rhys Carre, Leon Brown, Rhys Davies, Taulupe Faletau is on the bench, Rhys Webb, Rhys Patchell and Alex Cuthbert. So that's the kind of Welsh 23. And as I say, the really interesting thing is the way in which Gatland has dropped so much experience from his team, particularly in Alan Wyn-Jones, Justin Tipuric and Taulupe Faletau. 428 caps in total have dropped out of the starting 15 from the squad that started against Ireland in the last game. And a lot of conversation, a moment around Wales is how can Gatland transition from some of those older heads that need to start to be replaced in the team and bring through younger blood, but younger blood now that 8 months out from a World Cup, are they in a position to gain that experience in time to still be able to do a job at a World Cup and step up in those high pressure moments? And interestingly, Warren Gatland has referred to that in his press conference. They have called the likes of Chris Tschunza and Dafydd Jenkins into this squad to see what they can do. What can they do away from home in the Six Nations against a good Scotland side under a little bit of pressure, Wales? How do those players perform? Because as he's mentioned previously, he feels that Wayne Pivac and the previous coaches, despite bringing through new players, there hasn't been enough of a turnover within this squad, and it is an aging squad. Does he now have the time to bring those players through? So that's really, really intriguing. I think also they lost the physical battle massively against Ireland. They won't be the first side to do that. Ireland are so good, but I think that's another part of the reason that it's the forwards that we're seeing these changes. He said in his press conference today that actually they did get themselves in some good attacking positions, but then in terms of the back line, in terms of their overall attacking play, they just didn't capitalise on them. So he's going to give the back line another run out and hope that they can make the most of the opportunities that come their way. With that forward pack, do they have the power and perhaps explosiveness, the youth in there to get them over the gain line and win some of those upfront physical battles a little bit more? So let me know in the comments what you think of this team selection. I think it's closer to the sort of team that Wales fans want to see. I might hold my hands up and be wrong there in terms of what you will say in the comments, but a big criticism of Gatland last week against Ireland was that the squad was too old, that players needed to be moved on. He's started to go that way now. Are they going to be able to do the job against Scotland? In terms of Chris Tschunza, that's also a selection to see him on the blind side. He often plays open side for Exeter Chiefs, and Gatland, speaking to the BBC, it was at the launch of the Six Nations, basically said that he doesn't see him as an open side, possibly sees him as a 6, which is where he's starting this weekend, or in the second row. Exeter, of course, just fill their back row basically with ginormous men. So that's the reason he plays at 7. They probably don't see it as a traditional open side. So that's the reason that he's at 6. And also then Jack Morgan shifts to number 8. And again, Gatland has said that in terms of the backup to Faletau in the squad. They weren't really sure at the moment who's the next cab off the rank if they lose him. So Jack Morgan gets given a go at number 8. And I have to say, purely on paper, you look at that back row of Chunza, Reffel and Jack Morgan, and it's really, really appetising. Can they do a job on the Scotland back row who was so good at Twickenham? That's going to be another question, but I am excited to see how they go. So overall, in terms of that Wales team, I think there's a lot of changes that fans will be happy with. Are they going to be good enough to get the job done against Scotland? Let's move on to Scotland. I've said already on the channel how impressed I was with them at Twickenham. And as I mentioned in the intro, their team news is a lot more straightforward. One change from Gregor Townsend. Xander Fagerson comes back in and he replaces WP Nell. Fagerson has trained for a couple of weeks. He was kind of borderline for the England game. They decided to rest him and not select him, but he does come back in for this game. And also it's worth mentioning Hamish Watson is still not in the 23. Apparently he has recovered from concussion. He has gone through those protocols, but they're still just giving him a little bit more time. So in terms of that Scotland team, if we want to run through it in full, and then I'll get on to some of my wider thoughts. Pierre Schoeman, George Turner, Xander Fagerson, as I mentioned, the front row. Richie Gray, Grant Gilchrist, second row. Jamie Ritchie continues to captain the side with Luke Crosby and Matt Fagerson completing the back row. Ben White keeps his position at scrum half, had a good outing at Twickenham, scoring a try. Then Finn Russell, Tua Pilotu and Hugh Jones, and then Van der Merwe, Kyle Steyn and Stuart Hogg, the back three. Fraser Brown, James Batty, WP Nell, Johnny Gray, Jack Dempsey, George Horn, Blair Kinghorn and Chris Harris on the bench for the Scots. And I think, first of all, the Xander Fagerson coming back in is an improvement for them. I know Gregor Townsend has said they were pretty happy with how WP Nell went. I think one of the areas of potential weakness for Scotland in that game, perhaps later in the game, to be fair, and WP Nell was substituted in the second half, but was that scrum? I think Xander Fagerson comes in and gives them a better scrummaging option from the outset. I think just because WP Nell is at a point in his career now where obviously he's been around for a long, long time, he's really experienced, but from a physical point of view, I think Xander Fagerson is an improvement there. And then outside of that, from a Scottish perspective, the thing that strikes me with this is just how settled their team is. And we had this to a degree, really, with ahead of the England game, although there were a few surprising selections in there in terms of Ben White, in terms of Luke Crosby, names like that. But it's a team that feels settled. You look at that squad and you go, yeah, great. There's not too many surprises. There's not too many positions you're debating of, should this guy be in? Should that guy be in? They feel like they're in a good place at the moment. And also, you feel like they're starting to have the depth there that previously Scotland didn't. Even with this generation of players, you perhaps used to look at their sides and think they had real stars in certain areas, but if they were without them, were they quite as strong as they could be? And I think now you're starting to see a squad that actually is looking pretty strong, I think. So I'm excited to see how they go. From a Scotland perspective, they have to go 2 from 2. It would be another kick in the teeth if they win their first game in a Six Nations and then aren't able to back it up. I expect them to be able to do that this week, just because partly of how well they performed at Twickenham, having not played that well, if that makes sense. Gregor Townsend has said that there are elements of their performance that actually, particularly upon reflection and analysing it, that they weren't too pleased with, but they were still able to get the victory there. They were very, very ruthless in attack. I think they do need to step up a gear because you can't always rely on being ruthless every time you attack. You can't have that few entries and spend that little time in the opposition's 22 without it coming back to bite you eventually. But overall, I think this is a Scotland side in a good spot. Now, having said that, Wales will improve. I think this will be a tight game because Wales, first of all, they're playing Ireland, who are the best side in the world at the moment. That's what the rankings say. I think in terms of how good they are consistently, what we see in terms of the shape of their attack and their defence as well, that's the case. So they've played the best team in the world. They've been blown away in the opening half an hour, and then they've struggled to get themselves back into the game. Wales will put up a stiffer test for Scotland than many will be expecting. But even so, I still think this is a Scotland side now who have been here before. They've had the disappointments. Now it's finally time for them to kick on and go 2 from 2 at the start of the Six Nations. So I'm predicting that Scotland will get the victory, but I think it's going to be, hopefully, another cracking test match. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. As I've said already, about both of the teams that have been selected, but also who is going to win this weekend. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.